Greetings. Hello. Welcome to Spout, Thomas Nelson's spoken word podcast. We are here to share any and all things spoken, written, fiction, nonfiction, stories, poetry, creative writings, opinions, speeches. Do you have something you'd like to share? Contact us at thomasnelson.edu in the virtual studio. Today I have Thomas Rockson, a Thomas Nelson English and Literature instructor with me. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Hi.
What a beautiful day we have outside today.
It is a gorgeous day.
So, how long have you been an instructor here at Thomas Nelson?
I've been at Thomas Nelson a little over 10 years, and I've also been teaching in the VCCS previously at Rappahannock Community College for almost 10 years.
That's a lot of experience.
20 years roughly as an English teacher, a teacher of composition and literature.
You must really love it.
I do, right? Especially the literature part. I really enjoy sharing poetry with my students and with anyone.
So you get a lot of inspiration from your students. I mean, so when you give, assignments or, reference paper, whatever it may be to students, do you find that they keep your love of literature alive and have opinions and points of view that you really didn't, come from,
Sometimes they share ideas on poems that I thought I really knew very well, and then they surprise me with an interpretation that is, a little off the wall or a little bit different from what I have always understood. And so I do find that students, their enthusiasm for the poetry and their appreciation when they discover that there are deeper meanings in the poem, I think that's what keeps me going and keeps me interested in teaching literature.
Fantastic. That's what makes literature a living, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's relative, it's interpretation, it's inspiration, it's time, it's culture, it's all those things. Mm-hmm. I absolutely love it. That's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast at Thomas Nelson. So did you want to share any thoughts on, or for your students today on literature or writing?
I think probably the most important reason why we read poetry at all, and a lot of students will sometimes, if they're coming into my classes from disciplines that aren't grounded in the humanities, they may say, why is this important? Why do I need to read poetry? And I don't know that anybody really needs to read poetry, but we get pleasure from it. And I think that's the number one most important reason to read anything. Particularly poetry. It doesn't have a use in the world other than to bring us a little closer to our understanding of beauty and give us joy. So you read whatever makes you happy, and you find the poems that work for you, or you write the poems that work for you, and you just take pleasure in writing creatively. And playing with words. I think poetry is kind of a game. You play with words.
I think that's a beautiful thought when you said, you read it or you write it for the beauty, that you feel from it. And I think that's very important in the world today. I mean, we all remember or have students or others have said, I'm never going to use this.
Right.
But it can really open up, frames of thought, ideas, streams of consciousness, these things that, maybe you never really considered before.
Yeah. And some of it also connects you to other people with different perspectives and from other parts of the world. I teach, for many years, I taught predominantly world literature. And so the poetry that I taught goes all the way back to about 3000 BC and 2500 BC with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and all the way forward. And so teaching poetry is also, and studying poetry is also about learning the development of human civilization and all the incredible changes that have happened over the thousands of years as human beings developed vast and vastly different cultures and vastly different takes on the fundamental things of being human, like death. The afterlife and so on.
No, absolutely. Something that comes to mind for me is Dante.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bit older. It's not as old as Gilgamesh, but it's a bit older, and it gives us an insight into what they thought about the afterlife and morality. Even the smallest things, I think, sometimes as as minuscule as what are they eating? How are they speaking? What is the rhythm, right? All those things I just find fascinating. But I think I find history fascinating. And this is just poetry and writing and creative literature, or even if it is fiction, nonfiction, that gives us real insight to the growth and the beauty of human nature, I guess.
Yeah. And it shows us that despite big differences between our age and past ages, there are also commonalities. And the poetry can link us to the past as well as linking us to other people in the present day who are different than we are.
Now, I'm sure you have quite a few favorites. Is there some particular, author that really speaks to you, or, a couple?
Yeah, I am a big fan of medieval literature. I teach medieval lit now a little more heavily than the world literature that I used to teach. I'm teaching it this semester, in fact. Medieval lit has a special place for me. I love Chaucer, and then coming into the Renaissance, I love Shakespeare. I love older stuff. For me, the older it is, the better. But my favorite poet is John Keats. Okay. And he speaks to me more directly and more personally, I think, than any other poet that I could name. And his poetry is just so exquisitely beautiful that reading just one of his poems is, for me, a cathartic experience and a very powerful connection to what is beautiful in the world. And he wrote so much about beauty.
That's fantastic. Do you have a title you'd like to share? Maybe someone who doesn't read a lot of poetry. Is there a title, that you think is impactful that maybe the layman would really enjoy?
Well,
don't mean to put you on the spot.
There are so many, and I have poetry prepared to share today, although it's not Keats. But I do have some beautiful poems to share, and my parodies on those poems. I like to write parody poetry and light verse. I tried my hand at serious poetry. I'm not too good at it. I don't think I have that kind of a soul. I would love to be able to write like John Keats and have a soul that John Keats had as a poet, but I think my spirit is more geared toward humor. And I like to use humor in the classroom.
We definitely need humor in the world today. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So how does your process work in that? So you have a poem you love, and does it spark a parody idea for you? And then you just kind of go on from there? Yeah,
I find humor in just about everything around me, especially the literature that I love. And so I like to write parodies of the poems that I love the most and that I think are gorgeous. But there's always a little something about the poem or the poet that sparks an idea, or that seems in need of maybe having a little bit of the air let out of it, because poetry can sometimes seem a bit pretentious, right? And
right, especially you were speaking earlier about the older literature or poetry, and that you're speaking Old English, Shakespeare, beautiful language, but doesn't gel necessarily with our new English that we speak in this day and age. So interpretation may be a little bit hard for folks. Yeah,
interpretation is hard, and sometimes when I started as an English student, as an English major in college, I encountered poems that stumped me and that made me think, why is this poetry? It doesn't make sense, right? It didn't connect on a rational level. And I had to learn that poetry isn't just a rational expression of ideas the way conversation may be a rational expression of ideas. Poetry is playing with words and playing with sounds and images. So it took me a while to understand why certain poems are cherished and why they're beautiful and why they're interesting works of art. So, but they seemed to me, and they often seem to many of my students, very pretentious things that are extremely opaque, very hard to understand, and that seem, again, useless in the world, right? Why do we do this? And who thinks that's, my students will often ask me after I read a complex and odd poem, they'll say, "What was that poet smoking when he wrote that, Mr. Rockson?" Right?
Right.
And I say, "Well, nothing in particular, although this poet over here probably was smoking something."
Right.
And so we have, I like to take a humorous approach to helping them appreciate who these poets were.
It opens a dialogue.
Yeah.
It opens a dialogue. And the interpretation, I imagine, so after you do go through a little bit of the interpretation and speak about maybe this was stream of consciousness, or this is what was going on in history and why this means this, are they really, do they then kind of really see the interest, and does it spark in them, oh, I get it now,
Yeah. And I try to draw connections between the poets in their day and the values that they held, and the values they were expressing through the poetry, and the things that students enjoy today. So, for instance, when I teach the Romantics, and that's my favorite period of poetic history, despite the fact it's not as old as Gilgamesh or Chaucer, but I love the English Romantics, and Keats is one of the English Romantics. And when I teach them, I teach the values of the Romantic movement, I demonstrate them in the poetry, and then I show students that those values have never disappeared from our society, that the Romantics changed us. They made us who we are today in a big way. When we think about conservation of the environment, saving the whales and the trees, right, and all of those kinds of things are values that came down to us from the Romantic poets, who were the tree huggers of the 19th century, right?
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can draw that connection.
And so I tell students, go out into the pop music world. Just run all your favorite songs through your head, and you're going to find examples, and I give them extra credit for sharing examples of pop music that expresses the values of the Romantic movement today. It's still alive and still part of what we do in the creative music world, or it's a part of our spirit.
I'll say it's part of the human heart, for sure.
Yeah.
So today, you were going to do a couple of your parody poetry, and so how would you like to start that? Did you want to give us a reading of the original poem, and you're going to follow up with your parody, or can you explain that to me?
That's usually what I do. Because,
to us, excuse me.
Oops. Okay, there we go. I've got my poems on my computer here, and I'm going to need to log in again. But while I'm doing that, that's what I like to do, is that I will share the original poem first, and talk just a little bit about why I felt this poem was, first of all, a beautiful poem and an interesting poem, but then also what makes it ripe for parody. Why does this poem need to have a little of the air let out of it, right? Because, and I'll start with a poem by Wallace Stevens.
Sounds like great fun.
It is, right? And I have so much fun. I write a parody poem once every couple of years, but I have a small collection of them at this point. So Wallace Stevens was a modern poet he wrote during the 30s and 40s, I believe. I'm not all that big on modern poetry. I kind of avoided it in graduate school because this was the stuff that I found very opaque and very difficult.
Okay.
So here's a poem of his called Anecdote of the Jar. Very famous poem and very difficult. It's subject to all kinds of interpretations. And the short version of it is that I think it's a poem in which Wallace Stevens is sharing ideas about aesthetics, about what is beauty, and about the contrast between art and nature, and how poets and artists tend to impose an arbitrary structure upon the natural world when they create something. Art, or just the mind of the artist, has a way of pulling things from the periphery of the natural world and rearranging them in order to make a thing that is beautiful. So, but it's a very dense poem, very deep poem. It's often anthologized. And we're getting some.
Wow, to hear the Jets.
The Jets, yeah. That's a common experience at Thomas Nelson. And
it
so
is.
I'm used to
We
it.
are in the podcast studio with the door closed.
Yeah.
I have headphones on, and we can still hear the Jets. But that's okay.
That's right.
We'll give them a moment. Hey, that's the world we live in. They protect us. Thank you for your service,
That's
Air
right.
Force, right?
That's right. Yep.
All right.
Wallace Stevens, his poem is frequently anthologized, and so undergraduate students new to poetry encounter this very difficult poem often. and they say, "What the heck does that mean?" So, and I share their pain, right? So here's Anecdote of the Jar by Wallace Stevens. I placed a jar in Tennessee, and round it was upon a hill. It made the slovenly wilderness surround that hill. The wilderness rose up to it and sprawled around, no longer wild. The jar was round upon the ground, and tall and of a port in air. It took dominion everywhere. The jar was gray and bare. It did not give of bird or bush, like nothing else in Tennessee. And you can see that's a difficult poem for students.
I was visualizing that, and I can see how that might be difficult to interpret.
Yeah. The jar is a human creation. It's an artifact of human culture.
Disrupting nature, right?
Disrupting nature and pulling nature to surround the hill, as he said, right?
Right.
No longer wild. The slovenly wilderness becomes ordered and structured and becomes a thing of beauty. So very difficult and dense, and I've always felt this poem needs to have the air let out of it. And it was my students who gave me the idea of how to rewrite this and how to parody this poem. The title, Anecdote of the Jar. Anecdote is a word that often students stumble with a little bit. It's not one we use in everyday conversation, and they will misread the word as antidote, which is one they're maybe more familiar with. So an antidote being, right, the counter for some kind of poison or sickness. So I decided to write a parody called Antidote in a Jar. And this is my parody of Wallace Stevens' poem. I drank a jar of Tennessee white lightning up on Buzzsaw Hill, the kind Grandpappy used to make in his old still. Next thing I knowed, I was in a fit and stumbling round like a 2 years child. It sat me hard upon the ground and made that hill spin round like wild. It swelled my tongue and growed my hair. Damn near killed me. I don't care. My Betty Lou runned off on me, the bestest gal in Tennessee.
I love it. I love it. I do. I love it. I'm originally from Alabama. Have a lot of people from the South. You sound like people I know
Do I?
in my family.
I often wonder,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
I wonder if my accent is appropriate for Tennessee. I doubt it. But
and I don't mean that insulting at all. I mean that as a compliment. Absolutely. Yeah. And, when you started talking about what I thought was, a still or moonshine or whatever, it in my head it clicked and I said, wow, I didn't even consider that.
Yeah.
When we were during the original poem, that jar,
might have been a mason
might
jar.
Have been a mason jar. But absolutely, as soon as you said it, I saw it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I had fun writing that one. And
what was some of the same reaction from your students, about that? They, light bulb.
They enjoy it, and
yeah.
I think part of what they enjoy is that when I do read my parodies, I like to do voices, and to express the maybe the culture that I'm trying to capture, or just the spirit of the tone of the poem with my voice.
Sure, that tone definitely gives it a life. It lets you know that you're talking about, at least from my point of view, something a little more rural, something a little more country, if you will. Maybe Southern, not necessarily, but maybe Southern. But yeah, it definitely gives a tone to it, for sure.
There's a little bit of dialect in the way I write the poem, so that if you were to read it without a voice, without trying to capture that persona of the fellow on the hill drinking the white lightning, it wouldn't come across the right way. He says grandpappy rather than grandfather,
right,
and so on. Right. And then little expressions like stumbling around like a 2 years child. That's a kind of curious way to say that, right? Like a toddler.
Right. Instead of saying I'm falling down drunk.
Yeah, falling down drunk would be the cliched kind of way of saying it.
Right,
yeah.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. And, wow, lost my train of thought there. But when you're talking, that's where I was going, was with rhythm. So when you decided to do this parody, did you look at the rhythm of the words and the syllables and use that also? Because I mean, different areas around the country, different dialects, we have different rhythm meters, etc. Right?
Yeah. And when I write a parody poem, I like to try to adhere to the rhythm of the original, if I can, and even the rhyme scheme. I save some of the rhyme words. So in the Wallace Stevens poem, he plays with the word wild. He says, the wilderness rose up to it, the jar, and sprawled around no longer wild. So I held on to that word, and I used it in my second stanza. It sat me hard upon the ground and made that hill spin round like wild. And so the ideas are coming to me from the original poem, and I'm trying to preserve the rhyme scheme if I can. Also, I am noticing that the first two lines of both poems use the same rhyme sounds and the same words. Wallace Stevens' poem, I placed a jar in Tennessee, and round it was upon a hill. And then my first two lines, I drank a jar of Tennessee white lightning up on Buzzsaw Hill. Same words, right? And or if I couldn't hit the exact words, I would hit the same rhyme sounds to the fullest extent.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense, because we all know poetry doesn't have to rhyme. But now if you're doing a parody, which is a play off another poem, then you certainly want to hit...
That's right.
Hit those, the rhythm, I guess, if you want to call it, or syllables, or whatever it is you're hitting to make it consistent.
Yeah.
Right?
You want a parody to be recognizable as something inspired by and drawn from the original poem that it's parodying. So
right.
Yeah.
So would you say that your parody of this poem is your interpretation of maybe what he was trying to say about the mason jar, or is that just your imagination taking it on?
And
or both,
in
or
this
any.
case, this is a little different from a lot of the parodies that I do write. My strategy with parodies also is to take the meaning of the original poem and flip it on its head. Whatever the poet is trying to say, I'll turn it around and make the opposite expression. Here's a parody that I'm working on, and it's given me some difficulty, but I have the first few lines of it in my head. John Keats's famous poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, is a poem about the uselessness of beauty in the world. It is not something that has a practical or a practical value.
It's not pragmatic. That's what you're trying to say. It's nice to look at, but does it really do anything for you?
It's not utilitarian, right?
Right.
I think that was what I was kind of groping for there. But it speaks to our souls, and it does so by exposing us to beauty, to exquisite beauty. So that very famous poem about the Grecian urn that teaches Keats, as he says at the end of the poem, that beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye need to know on earth. I'm misquoting him there, but is all you know on earth and all you need to know.
Right, but to that end, your beauty is different than my beauty, is different from her beauty or his beauty or anyone's beauty, right?
Yes,
so it's, very relative, right?
So what I decided was I'm going to flip that on its head. Keats says the Grecian urn has no utilitarian purpose in the world, no practical use, but it simply teaches us beauty and truth are one. So let me play with that, flip it on its head, and my first lines of my parody are, O Grecian urn, I kid you not, you'd make a perfect flower pot. And so giving the urn a purpose in the world,
well,
right?
You definitely did that. Hit the nail right on the head. I think that's a perfect usage of a Grecian urn, right?
Now I just need to write the rest of that poem.
Right on. Now I think it's going to be more beautiful when you put the flower in it.
And when the flower goes, exactly,
and it grows,
right?
Yeah. Fantastic. I love it. So did you have another poem or parody you wanted to share with us today?
Let me share another one that I had a couple in mind, and I'm going to go with a different one than actually I originally thought of, just to continue the thoughts we are having about flipping a poem on its head.
Okay, sounds good.
So I'm
hi, Jets.
Yep, they're
There
back.
are Jets
Yep.
again.
I'm going to read one that does exactly that, and this is more typical of what I try to do with parody poetry. This is a 17th century poem by Sir Charles Sedley, and he's playing around with the ideas of what they call Petrarchism, which was a motif and a practice in poetry for hundreds of years, in which the poet would write about a lady who was the object of his adoration, and also probably the object of his spiritual urge to be a better person. So she was a figure of purity, moral perfection, spiritual perfection, but also earthly beauty.
So kind of like a Virgin Mary.
Virgin Mary, exactly, right? So, and they would praise the lady, and this is, here's where it probably differs from the Virgin Mary. They would praise the lady's physical beauty, going part by part, right? And comparing her to nature, and showing how, in some ways, the lady's beauty surpasses that of nature. Her eyes shine brighter than the sun. Her hair is more brilliant than gold, and so on.
Fantastic.
So here is Sir Charles Sedley writing and playing around with that idea, but sort of attacking it a little bit. By the 17th century, it was pretty old, and poking a little fun at it. And then I poked fun at his poem. His poem is called To Chloris, and he says, Chloris, I cannot say your eyes did my unwary heart surprise, nor will I swear it was your face, your shape, or any nameless grace. For you are so entirely fair, to love apart injustice were. No drowning man can know which drop of water his last breath did stop. So, when the stars in heaven appear, and join to make the night look clear, the light we know one's bounty call, but the obliging gift of all. He that does lips or hands adore, deserves them only, and no more. But I love all and every part, and nothing less can ease my heart. Cupid, that lover, weakly strikes, who can express what 'tis he likes. Right, so the idea there is, right, the Petrarchan poets of the centuries past, who were enumerating the parts of the lady and talking about which part they liked the best, are actually not quite suffering from love enough. Cupid's arrow strikes them too weakly because they don't love the whole of the lady. Right?
Got you. Okay. Just pointing out.
Fun poem, right?
Very, I don't mean to sound strange, very hormonal maybe, very
Absolutely.
surface, in the moment, what they're seeing in front of them, not so much the essence of the woman herself, right?
Not the essence of the woman, and not the totality of her physical beauty, I think, is a part of what Sir Charles Sedley is saying. These are poems that, of course, objectify women, and in the modern day, we take a different approach, right? A different way of thinking about that. But in Sedley's day, right, this was the common
if you
thing
don't want to get Me Too'd, you better take a different approach,
Long
right?
before the Me Too movement.
Right.
So here's my parody of it. I flip it on its head. He sees the totality of the woman as the thing to be cherished, and not the individual parts. And so I wrote to Chloris, Chloris, you have pretty eyes, and I would think them still a prize if they weren't even in your face, but plucked and staring into space. You're shapely, too, and I like curves composed of female flesh and nerves. So what if you were nothing more? I'd still have plenty to adore. And what if you were only lips, or cherub cheeks, or rounded hips, or hands, or toes, or knees, or chin? Oh, what a passion I'd be in! For I admire every part of you, each piece a work of art as much desired on its own as when they're all together sewn. I love you, dear, with all my heart. I'd love you even a la carte.
I find that extremely humorous and well done. Absolutely.
Thank you.
That really does shine a not contradictory, but opposition,
Yeah.
to the previous poem. What would you say? The Clotus, is it?
To Chloris.
To Chloris.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
The woman, you know what? That really does speak to culture of that time, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
A woman was just those things, very superficial, and I'm not trying to dog men of the period at all.
No.
Culture changes and shifts. We are products of our culture.
That's right.
No offense taken.
That's right.
But her mind did not come up
Mm-hmm. No.
in that poem at all, or what she could offer, what opinion, anything. It was simply what you could see.
It was. It's kind of curious in that exactly. Sir Charles Sedley is criticizing a little bit the poets who saw only the individual parts and saying you really need to see all the parts together, but it's still parts.
Right.
And it's still just
still
the
missing
body.
the soul, right?
Yeah,
still missing
the
soul.
essential thing.
This, maybe quite beautiful, but well read,
Exactly.
courageous, caring person,
Yeah.
and not just beautiful eyes and nice curves.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
I definitely like the way, and I was not aware that you were, and I was aware you wrote poetry, but I wasn't aware you wrote poetry that was a parody, on other poets' work, and I really like that. And gosh, I bet it really does help your students to understand the poetry. And I think that's such an exemplary, point of view and direction to take to get them interested and share with them so they understand.
And
Has it been successful?
It works in the classroom. I share my poems every opportunity I get when I'm teaching a particular period, and I say, "Great, I've got a parody of Shakespeare here. I'm going to share with my students, or a parody of Chaucer." And I think it helps, first of all, to show them poetry is fun, right?
Yes.
And second of all, it does, by flipping the poem on its head, I think it does help them to then engineer back to the original poem and
Absolutely.
see its meaning. Right,
Absolutely.
and understand where did I get that parody idea
You said
from.
that much better than me, but that's exactly what I meant. Thank you. So, did you want to share any additional poems or parodies?
If we have time,
We certainly
I
have
have
time.
more. Yep, I'll share another one. Going back to the modern era with a colleague of Wallace Stevens's. I have a poem here by John Crowe Ransom, very famous modern poet in the 30s and 40s. And he also, I find his poetry beautiful, but sometimes difficult and dense. This piece he wrote, I believe it may be a sonnet. I'm not sure. It's broken up
Now,
here.
excuse me, you said the 30s and 40s. So
Yeah.
we're talking about the 20th century,
20th
and
century.
30s, 40s. So this is really modern
Very modern poetry.
Okay.
And the modern poets had a very, they had an attitude toward poetry in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. T.S. Eliot, particularly, is a good example of this. That poetry should be rather opaque, that it wasn't for everyday people, that you needed to be somewhat educated, you needed to have skill with languages. T.S. Eliot could read and write 8 different languages. And he used those languages in his poems. So as you're reading one of his works, you're seeing Latin, you're seeing Greek, you're seeing Italian. He demonstrated his erudition through the poetry. And it raised poetry up above the common day experience. And I think that's probably why a lot of people see it as sort of pretentious.
Right,
yeah.
and that's what I was going to comment on. It's great that you want to raise your art to another level, but sometimes when you exclude, quote unquote, the common man,
Yeah.
Not saying that's really good or bad, it just is, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's how it could definitely get a label of being pretentious.
Being pretentious.
Sure.
And it's the opposite of what the Romantics had in mind, which was to write a poetry that exalted the common man and that could be read by the common man.
Right. Now, for me, poetry that I like to read or that I do read is something that does, tells me a story about beauty, an idea, a thought, opinion, this beautiful forest, the jar on the hill, like, whatever it may be. And then when you get into this poem here, I imagine it's not going to be quite as cut and dry.
And this one is a little bit easier probably than Stevens' poem, the Anecdote of the Jar. It's a sonnet, and it's a fun, I believe it's a sonnet, and it's a fun treatment of characters, of personas. John Crowe Ransom wrote a poem called Piazza Piece, and it's a poem about an elderly man trying to get the attention of a young and beautiful woman, and failing, right? As one might expect. So there are two voices here, and he splits the poem between the two voices. First the elderly gentleman, then the young woman. And again, it's called Piazza Piece. I am a gentleman in a dust coat trying to make you hear. Your ears are soft and small, and listen to an old man not at all. They want the young men's whispering and sighing. But see the roses on your trellis dying, and hear the spectral singing of the moon? For I must have my lovely lady soon. I am a gentleman in a dust coat trying. I am a lady, young in beauty, waiting until my true love comes, and then we kiss. But what gray man among the vines is this, whose words are dry and faint as in a dream? Back from my trellis, sir, before I scream. I am a lady, young in beauty, waiting. So he's playing with the idea also there of the Carpe Diem poem, where the old gentleman says in the first stanza of the poem, see the roses on your trellis dying, and hear the spectral singing of the moon. We don't have time, right? And I particularly don't have time. I'm elderly. Right?
I totally took it that way. And also from a woman's point of view, that made me think of childbearing. Mm-hmm. It made me think of age, mm-hmm. and withering on the vine, the moon, mm-hmm. the cycles of the moon. That's what came to my mind, for
mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the moon as a figure of Diana, the virgin goddess, the young lady, right, praying to the moon and preserving her virginity, where the elderly lover in the garden down below.
Now you just took that way deeper than I did, and I see exactly what you mean now when you say this poem was probably a little more tough, because I was just scratching the surface with these first ideas or thoughts. And
no, you had,
I might be right on track, but it doesn't mean it's not deeper. And as a parent, if you look back in, like you said, into Latin, into older literature, etc., there is a little bit more going on there.
And these modern poets knew all of that mythology,
right.
and they wove it in subtle ways into their poems. So yeah, I loved this poem. I love the two personas that he creates, and the way the lady has this romantic notion about love, right? I am waiting until my true love comes, and then we kiss.
She wants some young, dashing man to come and sweep her off her feet.
Exactly,
yes.
right? A perfection,
right.
Her concept of love. So once again, sometimes it's the title of the poem. A tweak to one word in the title gives me the idea. Anecdote in the jar became antidote in a jar, and then Piazza Piece. I'm thinking of an Italian piazza, right? So I changed it to Pizza Place.
Oh, nice.
And now I've got an elderly man flirting with a young waitress in a pizza parlor. I'm old and fat and shouldn't have dessert, but you're the cutest waitress in them all, and I should know. I've ogled each and all. The blonde at Burgermeister likes to flirt, but has a boyfriend. She's just after tips. Cheesecake? Too heavy on the hips. Is the cannoli made with chocolate chips? I'm old and fat and shouldn't have dessert. Look, bub, you're gonna order something, right? I do have other tables, don't you know? Try the mascarpone. It's really light. Or tiramisu. That's coffee-flavored cream. My number? Yeah, not in your wildest dream. So what'll it be, Gramps? I ain't got all night.
I love it. I love it. I was holding in my laugh, and I'm not just saying that. I'm saying it because we're on a podcast and people can't see me, but that was great.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
I certainly, I love the juxtaposition, and I definitely, when you talk about reverse engineering, I could definitely see it for sure. And so, really, to me, this poem is about, in both instances, about rejection.
Rejection, yep. And
that's simplified.
Age versus youth, too.
Sure,
right? Yeah.
sure. Age before beauty and all
That's
that.
right.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your poetry with us today. I want to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned that you are maybe trying to get the poetry club back up and come in. Is that true?
That's right. The poetry club is kind of struggling right now because of the COVID-19 situation. We're having to have our meetings by, I'm thinking about the gaming club. I sponsor 2 different clubs.
No, that's fantastic.
But the poetry club also is struggling because of COVID-19. And I would love to see them get involved with this project because I think they would love it. The poetry students here at Thomas Nelson do wonderful things with spoken word, and they love to share their poetry. Some of them are a little shy about doing it in front of groups, but podcasting like this, I think they would find very appealing and very accessible. They'd be able to share their poetry.
That sounds wonderful. And I would say, I think both of us, this being our first Spout, we were both a little bit nervous today, but I think it went really well.
Oh, yeah.
I think that, as we said, once you get talking, the conversation just flows.
Yeah.
And I would definitely love for you to share this with your students. And we'll reiterate again that if you go to tncc.edu/virtual studio, we have a request form there. Anyone, can request a podcast. Now, you and I are connected here through Spout, so they can, certainly, go through you and me, etc. And I'd love to continue that and get our students and your poetry club. And we're in here one-on-one, adhering to all CDC guidelines and whatnot. So we're good and safe. I definitely look forward to working with you in that.
I enjoyed this very much, and I am looking forward to doing more of it. Yeah.
I thank you so much. This was Spout, podcast at Thomas Nelson, and I'm Michelle Schonk, and this was Instructor
Thomas Rockson.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Fantastic. Have a great day. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. This was fun.
We're going to sign off now. Bye-bye.
Bye.